Hi, welcome to Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, warring sides in South Sudan sign another ceasefire agreement. Our correspondent tells us observers are cautiously optimistic this time the deal may deliver an end to 15 months of bloody civil conflict. Also, Nigeria claims to have seized back several towns from Boko Haram as the country braces itself for more militant attacks in the run-up to elections. President Goodluck Jonathan escapes a bomb attack in the northeast, which strikes shortly after he leaves a campaign rally. And IMF chief Christine Lagarde wraps up a 3-day visit to Senegal. That was over the weekend, and she gave some words of encouragement and advice. She's encouraged Dakar to look more closely at regulating the untaxed shadow economy. First up, after more than a year of fighting in which more than 10,000 people have been killed, South Sudan's rival factions on Monday signed another peace deal. After 4 days of intense negotiations at an African Union meeting in Addis Ababa, President Salva Kiir and rebel leader Riek Machar have agreed the outline of a power-sharing agreement to end the civil crisis. Now, the roadmap requires a final settlement to be drawn up by early March. Mading Noor is in Juba for us. He joins us now. Mading, so what is different this time round? We've seen several other close calls when it comes to peace agreements over the last 15 months. What's different this time?
What is unique about yesterday's agreement is the fact that the two sides have definitively committed themselves to a binding agreement by early March, as you stated at the onset, to set up a transitional government of national unity. Unlike before, the warring parties at this time roughly worked out some percentage ratios for sharing power among themselves. The two principals, the president and the rebel leader, have equally promised to observe a permanent ceasefire within 72 hours of signing the agreement. So there is a lot of optimism in the air in Juba. Residents sense that peace is just around the corner.
Well, that all sounds very, very hopeful, but what we know so far is that a transitional government's supposed to be in place by July, a final deal settled by March. Now, none of that's going to be easy. What, in your opinion, are the key issues that are still to be thrashed out?
What is clear is that outstanding issues are more than the ones that the parties currently agree on. The main sticking point will remain the deadlock over security and powers to be given to rebel leaders. For the security arrangement, we are here to hear whether the opposing armies shall remain separate throughout the 2 years transitional period, or they would simply be merged into one. On the status of the rebel leader, the mediators have proposed a new position for first vice president to be created. The supporters of the incumbent vice president are opposed to such a move. So South Sudan, this process still has a long way to go.
Thanks very much. Mading Noor there for us in Juba, South Sudan. In other news, Nigeria says that forces from Chad and Cameroon have helped its military retake at least 4 northeastern towns overrun by Islamist extremists. Now, Chad's carried out days of airstrikes against Boko Haram positions along the border with Cameroon. There's been growing calls for countries affected by the insurgency to work more closely together in tackling the militants as they ramp up attacks ahead of presidential elections due in 2 weeks' time. Well, our correspondent sent us this exclusive footage of aerial bombardment of Boko Haram.
The Chadian Air Force pounding Boko Haram positions. On the ground, troops have also stepped up their offensive. Their mission, stop Islamist insurgents from creeping further across Nigeria and beyond its borders. Boko Haram has become a regional threat, namely for Chad and Cameroon. The African Union has greenlit the deployment of more than 7,000 troops to combat the extremists. Over the weekend, the Islamists launched an assault on Maiduguri, a strategic city, the capital of Borno State. Boko Haram controls several towns in the region, mostly rural areas. The group wants to carve out an Islamic state. And just 2 weeks ahead of the presidential election, Boko Haram seems determined to disrupt the vote. The city of Gombe has recently been ravaged by explosions. On Monday, a car bomb exploded next to a stadium where President Goodluck Jonathan was attending a political rally. And a day earlier, suicide bombers targeted local markets, wounding scores of people.
I was riding my bicycle when I heard a huge blast. I fainted, and then I woke up here in the hospital.
My knees and my ankles are wounded, but I haven't seen a doctor yet.
Over the past 6 years, the uprising has killed more than 13,000 people and displaced thousands more. Security analysts warn the death toll is likely to rise ahead of the election on the 14th of February.
In Liberia, human trials of 2 potential Ebola vaccines have been rolled out in Monrovia. Now, they follow fast-tracked smaller trials that came in response to the epidemic that's killed over 8,500 people in West Africa over the last year. Up to 600 volunteers are participating in the first phase, and researchers hope that tens of thousands of people could eventually take part. The countries worst hit by the virus, Guinea, Sierra Leone and Liberia, have been making strides against the outbreak. But despite the promise of the experimental treatment and a drastic fall in new cases, emergency response chiefs say there's still no room for complacency.
You know, today we have approximately 6 cases per week in Liberia. We have something around 80 cases in Sierra Leone and 20 cases in Guinea per week. But this is, of course, a big improvement vis-à-vis what we had in December. But at the same time, we are saying, you know, all this crisis starts from one case. So if we don't maintain the degree of vigilance, we really have a big risk. And particularly that today people are starting to see a fatigue, people are starting to be, you know, celebrating, and that's a very dangerous moment. So in my view, and we know from epidemics in the past, that the most difficult moment is when you reach the lower figures, because that's where you have to maintain a high degree of vigilance and alert and being sure that you can drive to that 0 case.
Ugandan authorities plan to carry out DNA tests on a skeleton exhumed from the bush in Central African Republic that they believe belongs to a top rebel commander. Okot Odhiambo was a commander in the Lord's Resistance Army and presumed dead after reportedly being wounded in an attack by African troops in late 2013. He was once the deputy of LRA chief Joseph Kony and was one of those indicted by the International Criminal Court for alleged war crimes. Well, finally, IMF chief Christine Lagarde wrapped up a 3-day visit to Senegal over the weekend. Whilst calling Dakar a democratic model for the continent, she also warned that the country is at an economic crossroads. She urged that it ramp up the pace of change and suggested more be done to formalise the country's vast shadow economy. Manuel Landes sent us this report.
For the head of the IMF recently in Dakar, one way to boost economic growth is to tap into the highly innovative informal sector in Senegal. But to achieve this, it demands to be better structured and organised.
It's estimated that about 3/4 of recruitment in Senegal takes place within the informal sector. So it's an important part of the economy which contributes in structuring it. But no taxes are paid to the state and the employees aren't protected. So it's risky and uncertain business. The lack of collective income is a problem for the economy.
A problem for the economy, but a way of making a living for the shopkeepers who drive this informal sector by selling all the ingredients of the standard family food basket in small quantities. In Grand Dakar, a low-income neighbourhood in the capital, Sally does her food shopping on a day-to-day basis at one of these shops. Here she buys all the essentials she needs to prepare the meals for the day in single portions and at very low prices.
Give me 200 francs of ketchup and 2 bags of mustard. Sometimes I buy tomato paste in single portions, because if you buy the whole can and you give it to the cook to prepare the rice, she could use only half of it. It helps us a lot, because sometimes we don't have the means to buy the whole can.
The average monthly salary in Senegal is around 70 euros. The small shops that sell portions on demand meet the needs of their customers.
We sell like this because the customers prefer it. It's harder to sell the bigger cans, and we can sell more by the spoonful.
Manufacturers are well aware their products are repackaged and resold in smaller quantities, such as tomato paste in particular, an essential ingredient to Senegalese cooking.
It's a single-use packet of 70 grams, which has many benefits. It's no longer a can, it's much smaller. Its wrapping is aluminium and plastic, specifically made for food, and allows consumers to buy as much or as little as they need.
The booming informal sales approach has influenced the market. It's at these stores that may lie not only the joy of housewives, but also one of the solutions to increasing growth of the Senegalese economy.
Well, that wraps up Eye on Africa for now, but do stay with us. Short break and we're coming up.